right. So I want to thank everybody here for both on the panel for joining us today and those who are coming into the room, the virtual room. I want to thank everybody for attending the Data Economics Festival. Just remind people that there's still more that they can look up on Lydian.com/festival. And not to forget that the big event of the night is the Golf Clinic and Live Music Sing-Along tonight as part of the festival. You can get that on the website I said that I mentioned already, and there's still a few sessions left to go today, including a good one on the overview of the political ramifications and regulatory state and how things are changing right now. We're of course welcoming questions through the Zoom, whether it's through the Q&A panel, and that would be we welcome those as we're going through. Today, we're here to talk about how arrangements are changing for new and high-cost therapies and how the industry is trying to deal with this sort of over the last few years, and certainly the pipeline is quite full for the next few years about looking at therapies that are high cost or those that are impacting on disease states that are high cost. So, there's a whole lot in there about how we're going to get around paying for these, how we look at some one and done type methodologies in terms of diseases that used to be chronic therapies and now might have one or two, course of therapy lifetime, how different aspects of our system are starting to coalesce around proving value, whether it's work in diagnosis, work around better outcomes or following patients, like how we can show value or define outcomes to try to look at ways to adapt our current system to be able to absorb these changes that are occurring around us. So I'd like to welcome our three panelists today. My name is Neil MINKOFF. I'll be moderating this session, and I've been trained as a physician, and I've done medical director type stints at Partners, Harvard Pilgrim, Catamaran, and now at COAS. And I'll ask DEIRDRE if she would please introduce herself and say a couple words about where you are and what your experience has been.
Sure. And I echo Neil's appreciation for being invited to be on this panel. And so my name is DEIRDRE Parsons. I am Senior Director of Global Public Policy and Government Relations at Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. In my role, I have kind of remit over global, federal, and state public policy and government relations issues across the portfolio and above brand, including IP, tax, and regulatory policy. Prior to Alnylam, I was at Genentech, Amgen, and Avalier doing various roles in market access and public policy. And then very briefly, for those of you that are not familiar with Alnylam, and I'll go into this a little bit more during our Q&A session. But Alnylam is a biopharmaceutical company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We are based on Nobel Prize winning science called RNA interference. And prior to the launch of our first therapy, we created a patient access philosophy, which essentially means that we're going to pursue value-based agreements proactively with payers to the extent permissible. And to date, we've executed 30 VBAs in the commercial space and 2 within Medicaid. And so in my role, I have supported the creation of these VBAs for both commercial and Medicaid, and have actively worked with Capitol Hill to identify ways to further promote value-based agreements across both public and private payers.
And it sounds like you need a rest already. There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot.
That's on everything. That's awesome. We're going to really come back to you for every question, I think, DEIRDRE. Jim, can I ask you to say a few words, please?
Sure. Thank you, Neil, and I'm glad to be here. Yeah, I'm currently a partner with COAS Consulting Group. COAS is a leading market access consultancy serving life sciences, payer, and healthcare delivery organizations with strategic recommendations on really how best to ensure access to innovative medicines, similar to those that DEIRDRE's organization is delivering. COAS really specializes in the design and adjudication of innovative contracting models, including outcome and value-based contracting and the value-based payment methodologies, really to better correlate therapeutic use with the desired health outcomes that the system is looking for. Similar to Deirdre, I've been around market access for most of my career. Most recently, I was the executive director at Pharmacy Services, where at the time we administered the largest collection of outcome and value-based agreements, having well over 65 of these types of agreements in 2018 alone. And really, they reflected across a wide variety of medicines that are out there, including traditional, specialty, oncology, and genetic and rare diseases. Prior to Aetna, I was with Genentech in market access, and I'm born and raised in St. Louis. And so you can't be in market access in the pharmaceutical space without spending some time at Express Scripts. So I was at Express Scripts for 10 years. But again, thank you for having me, Neil. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. And Ken, you're coming at it from a slightly different perspective. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So Ken Boyle, I spent about 10 years in private practice as an evidence-based chiropractic physician before coming into industry. I worked in pharma for about 10 years in a broad range of roles. And now I'm with iRhythm Technologies. So iRhythm is in a very unique position in that we are a diagnostic medical device company, but we've combined our superior ability to collect millions of seconds of pure, clean data from a patient with a wearable and run that through the FDA's only cleared deep neural network artificial intelligence. And the net of it is that we process a lot of data for every patient, and we produce outcomes, diagnostic outcomes, I should say, that physicians agree with 99.9% of the time. And so we find ourselves in a very unique situation where we have to differentiate our value proposition and what it could mean in the long-term production of end goal outcomes for the patients, right? So I will say this, anything that I share today will be my opinion and not necessarily that of iRhythm Technologies.
And I won't hold it against you that physicians agree with you so often.
That's good.
So let me kick off with sort of a broad question just to try to get things started. And you know, one of the things that we've, I think, become aware of is data needs changing and evolving, right? And so when I started paying attention to prescribing decisions, first a prescriber and then formulary decisions, it was all about, what did the phase 3 study, placebo-controlled show, what was the p-value? That's all we cared about. And then by, within a few years, I was like, I don't care. Tell me what the DACON was, what really happened to the patient, right? And so we see the needs evolving and well beyond what the phase 3 pieces are. So I'd like to get you guys to weigh in a little bit about, how you see that evolution has occurred, what you see kind of as the next step or two, and is that ever going to change the FDA kind of look at things too, right? So like what we're doing now in terms of making decisions around drugs and what the FDA wants often feel unconnected. So I know there's a lot there, but I kind of want to just throw like a broad net out just to get the ideas flowing as we get going. And don't make me call on people. I will.
I can go first. I mean, I think that, given that more new modalities are coming to market, cell therapy, gene therapy, RNA interference, these are usually for very small patient populations. They're launched at fairly high prices. And sometimes they get approved on a biomarker or composite endpoint. And so you have heard, we've heard payers and policymakers just really asking about the value of these therapies and why are they so expensive? What is the true value to the healthcare system? And, spending is not infinite, as we all say. And I think that there's going to be more of a need for the measurement of true outcomes and using real world data to really understand how much these therapies are truly improving healthcare outcomes and lowering overall costs.
Yeah, I would agree with Deirdre. I think, there's certainly the data needs are increasing exponentially. Some of that is just simply driven by the capabilities of these organizations possess to collect data across the very disparate sources of that data that's generated by healthcare. There's just such a sheer amount of data that's generated by the healthcare system, both at the business layer, at the clinical layer, at the patient layer. And these layers are compounding the more we can organize these data sets. But I do think this is really driven by some of the access pressures that's being put on not only innovative manufacturers that are bringing these products to market, but also the ability for organizations to deliver a sustainable benefit. And, I've been around the manufacturer payer negotiations for most of my career. And probably even over the last 10 years of that, I've really come to recognize that our current model for developing formularies is a very broken model, right? There's very few drugs that are must-adds on a formulary. All of them are maybes. And when there's maybes, these organizations, even if it's a single drug in its class, these organizations are able to put pressure on the economics as a way to control that utilization. And that's not always in the best interest of the patient. So in order to replace a broken model, you have to have a correct model to go to. And that's what we're in the infancy now of doing. We're creating this model where drugs are measured by the outcomes that they produce rather than the discount that they can provide. And I think it's a much more appropriate model, and it allows drugs to compete off of outcomes rather than discounts.
Now, Ken, you had the pharma experience, but now you're in the diagnostic space. How does that weigh into your world right now?
So I think in this space, we're beginning to look at it the same way. You're reading every day more and more about value-based agreements and partnerships to understand how real-world data, all of that disparate data, can be translated into real-world evidence to guide decisions. And I heard Deirdre mention cost-effectiveness analysis, and I think that's really important to do when you're making a decision between multiple options. But what can complicate it for either novel interventions or diagnostics is that your cost effectiveness in comparison might be to the step of a diagnostic outcome. And then you have to think about what happens after that for each different ecosystem you're considering, right? So if we're talking about a Medicare Advantage population where the standard of care after a diagnosis might be very similar because it's all in a cost containment model, well, that can be pretty easy to figure out. But when you start looking at where fee for service rules the day, or maybe even where there's a mixed bag, it can get infinitely more difficult.
So one of the things that we hear lots of different entities in the market talking about, whether it's regulators, decision makers, formula makers, is real world evidence. Everybody was talking about real world evidence, but it's very hard to get real world evidence at the time when the first initial decision is being made, right? So there's either a formulary decision being made, or, in Ken's case, a coverage decision being made, or a preferred type of diagnostics or something of that nature. How have you been approaching that pivot, right, from what we have at launch to what we're going to need to provide eventually, and how do you work with payers around that? And I don't think it's an easy question. I'm throwing it out there because I'm going to shamelessly crib your ideas.
I would say that we're right in the middle of that pivot right now, and so it's a little uncomfortable. And so, in addition to considering different alternative ways to approach payers, we also need to think about the lives that are covered and the systems that manage that, right? And so I think we're beginning to see in our part of the industry engagement and partnerships with someone like an NAMCP, for instance, or an ACC, to understand what data points are important to capture, what data points are important to leverage into the contract and call balls and strikes on if you end up into a contract, and how does that differ from environment to environment.
Jim, I know you have a lot of thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, just having sat in the payer position on this, I think we need to expand and make sure that everybody's on the same page relative to when real world evidence, or RWE, is spoken. What do payers really mean by that? And it doesn't necessarily mean that payers are automatically pivoting to cost effectiveness, that highest stare on real world data. The real world evidence is collected through data, through, all the way from the very beginning to understanding the disease state and the burden of illness of the disease and the safety and randomized controlled trials. And so all of this data is put together that forms the majority of the body of real world evidence. And so when payers are asking about real world evidence, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're automatically talking about cost effectiveness, although that's kind of easy to poke payers in the chest on, right? Because they're going to pivot to that. Once you supply all that information, then they're going to say cost effectiveness. It's not possible to have cost effectiveness or how the evidence of how a drug performs in the wild, per se, until the drug's out. And even then, we have to allow practitioners, like yourself previously and Ken previously, to get some experience with that. And it's all that goes into clinical judgment. Payers are built to standardize processes and standardize pathways, if you will. Physicians and people that are caring for these patients are there to actually identify the randomness of that particular patient in order to best treat that patient. And so there's just so many different layers. And if a payer immediately goes to cost effectiveness, you're probably not engaging that payer with the right dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think we have a, as a manufacturer, there's this tendency to want to continue to go forward with a placebo controlled, double-blinded phase 3 study, because that will get you approval from the FDA. But then you realize, approval of FDA doesn't mean coverage and quality of coverage. And especially if you're launching into a competitive area where there's lots of other therapies already on the market, you do want to try to show some type of comparator. And you can't always do that. I mean, certainly even in cancer trials, you still have to run against placebo or standard of care, whatever is ethically appropriate. But this is where I do think that, particularly in therapeutic areas where adherence might be an issue or persistence, you might be able to show the value of a drug in the real world setting if it's compared to how a patient might normally take their therapies in real settings.
I want to come back to something that some folks have touched on here in terms of I think Jim mentioned it, but Ken mentioned it as well, which is the clinician, right? Or going to, you were talking about the managed care physicians. Jim, you were saying that, you think folks like me should, you'll rue that, but folks like me should, or at least good clinicians should have a chance to, understand how their patients interact with a product, with a diagnostic, with a molecule, whatever. At what point is it, so let me ask it this way. How does one show value to the prescriber beyond what you're showing to the payer? And how do you balance that? Or do you even make a decision to say, we're going to focus on the prescriber here and then catch up to the payer, or the other way around, depending on the disease state? How do you balance prescriber versus payer in that value equation?
I think it's both the prescriber and the payer have to be allowed to have experience with therapeutics. And they can't get that experience with the therapeutics to understand which patients are best suited for a given therapeutic. We have to be able to allow providers to do that without jumping through hoops just to get that. And again, it kind of goes back to my earlier statement in terms of, payers really do not like randomness because you can't actuarially model that. And ultimately what payers are trying to do is deliver a sustainable benefit to clients at premiums that they can afford to cover more healthcare, not less healthcare. It's just the perception is that they're trying to cover less healthcare. But that's why we have the appeals process, because providers really are looking for that experience. And if they really do feel a patient is best suited for a particular therapy, they can go to that appeals process. It's just cumbersome right now. I don't know. I probably would defer to Ken in terms of the how to appeal to at a provider level with the necessary information, and maybe try to how we relieve bottlenecks. And Deirdre, in terms of, I love your comment earlier about quality of coverage, because I do think that's a big differentiator, and that's a whole other topic that they should be addressed.
Well, I can tell you from the experience I've had since I've come into this device diagnostic space that we spend a lot of our time first understanding the prescriber and what's important to them, because that varies from ecosystem to ecosystem. The main things that are pretty much always important are, how do the improvement or change in clinical outcomes, operational outcomes, and financial outcomes translate to that, what's important to that provider. And so I think when we have conversations, I'm just thinking out loud here, when we have a conversation with a provider, we're going to focus in on the things that are important. It's usually, what are you getting value-wise for your time investment or your time change? And does that have any impact on the improvement of your patients? And does it expose you to any more liability? Those are kind of the things that are always on the surface. With payers, I mean, we all like to think everyone's engaged in the quadruple aim, but I sometimes think, and I don't know, so I'd have to rely on you, Jim, for that. But I think sometimes for payers, it's less about time savings for the physician and more about just quality of the output and the value and how that impacts overall cost, things like healthcare resource utilization and outcomes and things like that. So I do think there's a translation of value that has to occur differently, but you have to first understand the unique circumstances of your target audience.
So as we've pivoted, let me pivot a little bit in the conversation. We've been talking about value and we've been talking about outcomes and kind of get into a little more of the meat around value-based or outcome-based contracting. So I'm going to, say that, like, right off the bat, there's so much to this. But one of the things that I think is worth making sure we explore is how the Medicaid contracts may be different than the commercial, and the recent CMS guidance around that. Now, luckily, we have an expert. So can I get you to say a few words about that, Deirdre, and then we can all pile in?
Sure. I'm not sure if I'm an expert, but I will do my best. So for those of you that are not familiar, last year, CMS came out with a rule that would essentially clarify how manufacturers can use an existing regulation called the bundled sale regulation to capture the rebates that are paid as part of their value-based arrangements without impacting Medicaid best price, or rather without setting a new Medicaid best price. And why that's important is right now, manufacturers have to provide the lowest price paid to any commercial entity to Medicaid. And so right now, Medicaid pays, we provide a 23.1% rebate to Medicaid. If we give a steeper discount to any commercial payer, then we have to provide that to Medicaid as well. So what CMS said essentially was that manufacturers can use a bundled sale regulation or this bundled sale arrangement to lower the risk of actually resetting Medicaid best price. And so for us, as we were already doing VBAs within commercial as well as Medicaid, this was actually the approach we were taking. So we weren't shocked by it, but we were happy to see that it was actually in writing and clarified. So that's great. And I think that will help more manufacturers feel like they can use this approach to do value-based agreements and not get dinged on their best price. One thing I will also mention is that there are a few other aspects of the rule that I'm not going to go into in great detail, but CMS proposed a way to do multiple best prices, which manufacturers love and state Medicaids hate. And so that also requires some additional guidance to be put out by the new agency, new CMS administration. Should they decide to go forward with that, it's on regulatory freeze right now because the Biden administration is still reviewing that particular rule. But I would also just say that in addition to that, the Healthcare Innovation Caucus in the House is actively looking at ways to support VBAs within commercial and in Medicaid. And so they're specifically looking at anti-kickback waivers, as well as changes to best price and AMP reporting. So potentially more to come from the Hill over the next year or so on VBAs.
So talk about, I mean, as we're at the Data Economics Festival, talk about an increase in data that your organization is going to have to support, Deirdre. That's going to exponentially, but at the same time, the point you mentioned is manufacturers are embracing that. You know, Alnylam is out there in the forefront, leading, you know, the body of industry to pursue these and get higher up on the learning curve with how's the best way to deliver these to the market, so all patients can have access to to your therapies. And I think that's really, you know, so I see the government programs leading the charge, even though commercial has probably crept out there the last few years, you know, and like I was mentioning, you know, most of our contracts at Aetna were in the commercial space, right? But I think there's a tendency for payers through these value-based arrangements, at least some payers, to want to take the manufacturer to zero if the drug doesn't work. Zero does not work in any economic model we have, nor should it. It has no place. No manufacturers coming to the market saying our drug is 100% effective in every scenario. And they shouldn't be held to that standard because clinical trials never produced that in the cleanest sense of the setting that we studied the drug to correlate it with outcomes. So a zero economic model doesn't work anywhere, but what the model could allow to progress in both government and commercial is kind of a replacement of this competing for drugs based off of discount. Let's compete on outcomes and let's compete on contribution to patient benefit, and then let the physician and the patient decide what's the best drug for them given their scenario.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And if I could just add a little bit more, I mean, the philosophy that our leadership took right at the outset, prior to us even having our first drug on the market, was, you know, we raised $5 billion in capital, private capital to date, and it took us 16 years to get our first drug FDA approved. And the thinking was, you know, what good is raising all this money and spending all of this time in clinic if patients can't get access to therapy? That makes no sense. And so we want to put our money where our mouth is effectively, and we are willing to pay on outcomes, and those will be aligned to the phase 3 endpoints. So it's going to be based on the trial data. And, you know, to your point, Jim, like, you know, we're not going to do zero. It's not going to be a full money back guarantee, as much as some of the press seemed to report it that way when we first came out with this. But we have been working with payers actively even before we received approval for any of our therapies, and just did a little bit of prototyping, saying, what are the outcomes that you want us to think? What are the appropriate measures? How is this feasible for you to measure? Is this something that we can measure? What makes the most sense? So it's a true value-based agreement for both of us.
Right.
It's interesting as I listen to you talk about that, Deidre. I think, you know, at being a diagnostic, it's a little different because your deliverable is upstream from the end result outcome, right? And so what I start to wonder is, and I've read a little bit about this, and I haven't had a whole lot of experience yet in value-based contracting, but I've read that the complexity of those contracts sometimes are the very barrier to getting them in place. And so there's been some movement towards trying to find a more simplistic output or agreed upon outcome that would translate and everybody understands that. And so I was just curious to know if you've experienced any of that.
No, excellent point. And thank you for raising that. And I think, Jim, you had said that you think that the a lot of the activity or kind of forward moves going to come from the government side. So what we've seen is that, these large commercial payers have this, very rich infrastructure where they could do these more complicated value-based agreements or outcomes-based agreements where you do have the claims data, or you can pull the lab values from specific tests down. But that's still very burdensome on the manufacturer to even adjudicate, to have a data aggregator to validate the claims. Everything's coming in from different payers and they're all going to look different. Whereas Medicaid, and as I mentioned, we have 2 Medicaid value-based agreements to date, they don't have the sophisticated infrastructure, but they still want to do these. And so that's where they might look at claims. What can you easily see in claims, or something that's easy to evaluate, as opposed to trying to extract it from the provider, which takes a lot more effort. So, and I think that's where, like, if you start easy and start small, then you can probably become more sophisticated from there. But yeah, there's definitely a difference between Medicaid and commercial payers.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Jim. I was going to call on you anyway. So you go, and then I'll see if you answer my question anyway.
There's pros and cons to both sides, right? Commercial, you can get maybe access to more data. Medicaid, you can get access to data from at least a single source, the state warehouse, right? And so, but you're right, the burden, what I saw as a payer, right? And we were at the time the 3rd largest national payer. Health plans are hard places. You're looking, everybody's strapped for resources, right? But in a health plan, you're looking for a coalition of the willing to ask them to do something extra. And I was responsible for formulary development and manufacturer negotiations, i.e. the rebate guarantees that we were providing to clients, not necessarily tasked with developing outcomes so we can cover more drugs than less. And it was actually almost antithetical to what the mindset of these broader organizations. You're like, hey, no, our job is to cover drugs, not deny them. So let's assess them on their outcomes. But it's, I think it's going to become easier and easier. The onus shouldn't be placed on the manufacturer to organize these data, nor should it be placed on the health plan, because, I can tell you smaller health plans, whether it be like, I'm just throwing out one because I'm in St. Louis, Mercy Health Plan of St. Louis, right? Maybe they have 75,000 lives. They don't have necessarily the bandwidth to adjudicate all these, but they still should be allowed to participate. So how do you organize that for the manufacturer? And this is really why we launched COAS Healthcare. And this is not a commercial for that, but it's to organize it at a different level to allow more participation. And that's particularly important when you have diseases like Alnylam's treating, where that Mercy may only have 1.2 patients a year. So how do you adjudicate that? That's not fair to Alnylam to take on more risk than they should. It's not fair to Mercy to take on less than they should. So how do you package that and maybe adjudicate that contract with 15 Mercy Health Plans of St. Louis in aggregate, and allow Alnylam a little bit of administrative breathing room, if you will, to actually offer these contracts more broadly to the market.
So
anyway, that's probably not where you were going.
No, so you're getting at where we wanted to go, and exactly where you wanted to go in terms of the complexity, right, of trying to do this. And, Ken and I just coincidentally had a conversation very recently about how to even determine what is an appropriate outcome in a diagnostic versus a therapeutic window, right? And then the question that's filtering in a couple of times now from the audience is, okay, well, what is the data that you need to determine how the outcome is met, right? So, just on a broad range, there's claims data, clinical data, EMR data, PRO data, I'm sure other, total cost of care data, things that I'm probably not even thinking of yet. And so how do you choose what's the data needed? And for God's sakes, how do we make it easier to get it? Because that seems to be still a pretty significant barrier.
I'm
just going to sit back and let all the answers flow in.
I'll take a quick shot at that. And I would say more and more, as more of these disparate data sources are being aggregated at the cloud level, it allows for that information to be analyzed. So cloud computing will certainly provide that type of value. And, I don't want to go as far as, because I don't think we're there yet, but blockchain technology will be able to deliver that infrastructure. It's just, unfortunately, right now, people say blockchain and they think Bitcoin. And while that is a mechanism, hey, if the banking system can maybe eventually begin to operate that way, so can our healthcare system, in terms of who has access to certain data pieces and what is considered valuable. But we definitely need a single source of truth across all these data sources, including the digital therapeutics. We need to be able to, in this system, to correlate every intervention at a patient, and maybe not every intervention, but every meaningful intervention or therapeutic or digital application, to how it contributes to the betterment of the overall healthcare system and at the individual patient level. I'll stop there just because.
Well, yeah, I want to give people a chance to weigh in, and then I want to ask a follow-on question
Absolutely.
too, but I don't want to cut anybody off either.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I fully agree with you, Jim. I mean, there needs to be a way to not have this be so burdensome for the payer or for the manufacturers. And so just to give folks like a flavor of how much lift this is internally, it took 13 different functions, not people, functions, to come up with our VBA offerings, as we call them. And on a day-to-day basis, there's probably about 5 to 10 people that are working to do the adjudication and the calculations of all of the rebates and the validation for our 3 therapies and the 3 different VBA offerings. As far as the what data do you go for? How do you use it? How do you create that menu of offerings? This is where I've stated, we did some prototyping with payers prior to even putting our proposal together, just to give you a flavor of what what our VBA contracts look like. We're very kind of public about our structures, but for our second therapy, we have what's called an access rebate, which allows us to fulfill the requirements of the bundled sale regulation. And that is basically to ensure that the drug is covered to label. Then we provide a clinical experience rebate, and that aligns with the clinical trial data. And so that will be different from therapy to therapy, but we try to look at what are the data, what are the endpoints, what were the endpoints that were collected in the trial. Let's see how we can have those be the true outcomes. And then the other thing is, because our therapies right now treat rare diseases, when we set price, we are setting price based on what we expect the patient population to be. We don't know if that's always going to be the right prevalence numbers. And so what we came out with our second therapy, and what we're using for our third therapy as well, is called a prevalence-based adjustment. And so if the prevalence exceeds, within a payer population exceeds the expectation, then we'll pay an additional rebate on top of that. So that way payers feel like they're getting more value out of this agreement.
I think I would probably add that for us, it's more about understanding, when we deliver an improvement in diagnostic yield, what would that mean in the broad context of value to the payer or to the organization, in terms of decreased healthcare resource utilization and all the cost offsets for intervention. And if we understand that, we can model that. Can we come back and agree that there's a certain yield that is important to reach? Or do we have to go to other outcomes like increasing throughput or improving access, what that may look like? So my mind is certainly being opened up by listening to these experts talk about where they're at. And there's a lot of opportunity, but the last thing I would add is this: I think it's going to have a lot of organizations like the one I'm currently with looking for third parties that can kind of broker manage the data and help it be fair for both sides.
So that's actually something that I wanted to kind of jump off on and kind of, add a second component to it, which is a big piece of it is also the financial handling, right? So we have, and getting to value and outcome-based contracts, I think there were some things that were complicated early on, but felt like they fit into the normal rebate structure, right? Like we'll do an outcome-based contract that adjusts the amount that flows between the organizations based on the number of fractures people have on osteoporosis drugs, the number of ER visits people have on diabetes or MS drugs, things like that, that were kind of in the normal scope of things over the course of a year, right? That's not where we are anymore. And the finances need to catch up, I think. Where are those being issues in terms of doing these kind of contracts? And beyond that, like, what do we need to be thinking about? There are finance people, as part of this data economics, like what should they be thinking about in terms of how to support the financial interactions or where that financial support needs to be as you're trying to track patients maybe over many years, maybe across many plans?
I mean, I think that's part of the issue. I mean, it takes a while to see if a drug is working as it should in clinical trials. So you're not going to pay the rebate immediately. It's not going to be a month later or 2 months later. It might be, a little bit longer than that. And so I think that does introduce some risk for the payers as well as for the manufacturers in trying to figure out, how much do we hold back for potentially having to pay out rebates and what can we actually spend on.
Yeah, and I think that's where the sophistication of these types of systems, it's not, as we kind of started out, it's not just the adjudication of the contract itself, it's the adjudication of the financing around the contract. And I think we are, I don't know if we're at version 2.0 yet. I know when I was at my former payer, contracts that we initiated in 2016 were considered infantile by the time we got to 2018, and we just got higher and higher up on that learning curve. But now you're putting in that financial layer, and some of these contracts are very, to Deirdre's point, you got to let this play out a little bit. We're just not having cures the next day. In oncology in particular, the innovation, the pace of innovation is outstanding, and we overlook that. If you look at what the PARP inhibitors did in ovarian cancer, they took ovarian progression-free survival in ovarian cancer 5 years ago. That was, the chance of making it 5 years was at the time was 15%. Now it's 75%. And so that progression-free survival point used to be, 9 months, and now we're looking at 39 months. Well, you got to let that contract play out then, because you're showing the drug's value continues to accrue over time. How do you allow the financial system to accommodate for that as well? And then how do we organize the entire delivery system, whether it be provider, and let's not forget the patient. And, the average cancer patient goes bankrupt within 2 years of diagnosis. They go through their life savings. We can't have that. So how do we let the patient participate over time? And it's a feel better or your money back thing. They need to be getting some money back as well if there is eventual failure. I know I hit like 6 different topics.
No, you've got me thinking about a couple of different things, because I heard you said that we need a little runway. We need to get it figured out. There's a lot of questions still to be answered around how the finances catch up to the agreements. And where I was going in my mind was, does it make sense to first initiate a demonstration project where you can capture some of this in like a petri dish environment and then move into a broader contract? And I was wondering, Deidre, if you guys have had any success with that.
It's a great question. We have not done so many demonstration projects. I think this is where we just start to work with some payers and go back and forth and get feedback from them. one thing that I think, would be helpful moving forward is if CMS and the Innovation Center there would allow for more VBA demonstration projects. They, originally, I guess with the Luxturna example, had said that they were going to go forward with a VBA for a new therapy, and then pulled it back. They didn't want to be seen like they were too cozy for one manufacturer or one therapy. I do think that there is absolutely the need to do more demos in this area, particularly within Medicare. Right now, Medicare fee for service, you cannot do any VBAs. And, for us, that's where like a large part of the patients are, and we would love to be able to do it, and we just can't. And so I would absolutely love to, engage the new administration once everyone's in their seats to talk about that.
I would agree. And I think in addition to that, the market can also help itself by finding the right parties with the right intentions without it being penalizing down the road, in terms of nobody produces results of these things. These things are all hidden underneath closed doors in a file cabinet, and while they're adjudicated, but at the end of a certain period of time, results aren't put out there. And it's not, they don't have to necessarily be put out there in a way that pokes either the manufacturer or the payer in the chest, but they do have to be put out there in a way to know that, yeah, actually there were results on this. We need to have results that, yes, Entresto actually does reduce CHF admissions in a commercial population by 18 to 20%. And you know what? In a commercial environment, each one of those admissions saves $25,000 on average. So we need to start letting some of these results out. It doesn't have to be so sterile in a demonstration project, but at least it informs the broader organizations of the benefit and the attributes of these types of contracts.
Okay. I want to grab a couple of questions that came in for the audience as we start to wind down. One is very, very interesting. Is there a market for securitization of contracts to a wider investor market, right? So at other sessions during this data festival, people are talking about securities based on VBEs, maybe securities based on VBAs as a hedge for longevity risk or something. Do you guys have any comments on the potential of using contracts like this to be part of something that could attract a wider investor market?
I'll go real quick. I do think there's an opportunity. I've long thought about this in terms of how we can allow innovators like Alnylam to be reimbursed for their products so they can continue to innovate, because we don't want that to stop. And they can't stop their research waiting for payment 5 years down the road. They can accrue for potential reductions in that, but I'm also hesitant to put in, not to go back to the time of CDOs and derivative markets and housing, but we're dealing with healthcare here and people's livelihoods and lives. We have to be able to figure out how to change the tire on a moving 18-wheeler while the system still runs as it's going down the highway. So I'm hesitant to necessarily explore securitization with, I think, what it would take. And it would have to take the market, and bond issues and things of that nature to support. And I think we'd have to be very thoughtful in how we do that.
Anybody else want to weigh in? It's a complicated topic. Did anybody, another question came in from the audience. Anybody on the panel have experience with ex-US determinations of value or outcome?
We have been, so peripherally is my short answer. I think certainly at Alnylam, because of our patient access philosophy and interest in doing value-based agreements with any payer to the extent possible, we have been speaking with payers, ex-US, Brazil, some EU countries. There's been a lot of white papers that we've produced. We've been kind of laying the foundation around the importance and the potential for value-based agreements, but some of these countries just don't have the regulatory framework set up quite yet to support them. But it does seem like there's interest. And so hopefully over time, more of these will be adopted ex-US.
We're coming quickly to the top of the hour, and I want to be very respectful of people's time. So I'm going to start to wind us down. I think that, if there are any, final thoughts, things we didn't get to that you want to throw out there. A resounding no. That's great. No, seriously, it was so I do want to take a second to thank all of you for your participation today. It was a really, I think, fruitful conversation, and gave us an opportunity to cover a lot of different aspects of what are not simple subjects that are constantly in flux right now. So I want to thank all of you for participating. I do want to thank everybody who joined in and has been paying attention and submitting questions. Thanks for that. A reminder to everybody involved, there's the happy hour tonight with the golf clinic and the sing-along that people are encouraged to try to attend as if it were more of an in-person traditional meeting. And with that, I would like to thank all of you very much for participating, and hope everybody got a lot out of it, and have a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you all. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.